you're going to fail. So what's the culture that you're building at your company around allowing employees to fail? And I'm convinced that employees aren't afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure, depending on the culture. So how can there be a successful failure? Well, an experiment can be a failure, but be a success because of what you learned. And let me give you a quick example from Amazon. In 2014, Amazon released a phone. Most people don't remember it, called the Fire Phone. Bezos' pet project. He thought Amazon needed a phone. Well, why, I don't know. iPhone was out, Android was out, people had chosen their platforms. Why Amazon needed a phone is still a mystery. But they launched the phone, and in 2014, big splash, and literally they had to reduce the price to a penny to get anybody to buy one. And they didn't buy it because, again, why do I need a phone from Amazon to help me shop easier? And so at the end of 2014, Amazon wrote off $180 million in inventory and development costs. Maybe one of their biggest, could be. However, here's where the success comes from. So to create the phone, they had to create a whole lot of new skills around voice processing, around how phone works, around radio, right, all those kinds of things. So it's got a demonstration in late 2014 of a new device the team was working on that was a cylinder that sat on a table that you could talk to. What we now know as Alexa, the software that powers it, and the Echo, the device that listens for that audio trigger and then processes that audio and responds back in audio. Well, the Echo and Alexa, that ecosystem has become quite a success. And so that's an example of, we learned all this stuff doing the phone, didn't work on the phone well, but boy, we were able to take all that we learned and put it into this other device that actually continues to work well.
Welcome to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. I'm your host, Johnny Mango. This is the place where we inquire about lifestyle, culture, and careers. Weekly, we meet with new guests that make a contribution of their insightful stories about their careers and how those careers impact their lifestyle and culture. Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Mango, and welcome to Minutes with Mango. And today we have somebody joining us that has a ton of business experience that I believe would be beneficial to anybody. And even if you don't own a business, or if you're thinking about starting a business, or if you've had a business for 20 years, this may be all worthwhile to listen to this gentleman. I'd like to introduce you to Steve Anderson, who's the author of the Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon. So, Steve, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Steve, what I'd like to do is just, could you give us a little background on how you got to writing this book? What brought you to this point?
So my work background is in the insurance industry, and I've literally been part of that industry my entire career. The last probably 30 years, I've been doing consulting with independent insurance agents on technology, what they need, how to pick the right one, how to implement it, how to get the most out of it. And so I've been immersed in the technology arena a long time. And I think we all know technology continues to develop rapidly, maybe more rapidly now than it used to.
Sure.
And I started asking the question, is the biggest risk insurance agents face, I've since broadened that out to businesses face, actually not taking enough risk? And so, meaning, 25 years ago, businesses had time to kind of figure out technology, what the impact is going to be and how they should adopt it or not. In today's world, with things changing, daily, weekly, maybe monthly, they just don't have the time to wait. And then the question becomes, what do they miss by waiting and trying to let things flesh out? And so So that question led me to start really researching different companies, some that have been very successful at one point and literally are gone, and companies that have been successful and continue to be successful, and try and understand the differences. All the names we know of that are used to talk about what happens to companies when they start the downward slide. But I came across Amazon. Today I say obviously, but at the time it was just another successful company. And I discovered, and I sort of knew the shareholder letters. Again, CEOs for public companies typically write those once a year. Most of the time, in fact, the vast majority are boring and not really interesting. What I found unique about Bezos is how interesting he was and how well he wrote. So his first letter was in 1997. That was the year they went public. And then the last letter in the book is the 2018 letter. Subsequently wrote the 19 and the 2020 letter when he then stepped aside as CEO. And so I read those letters initially and kind of one here and there. And then I got all of them and literally put them in order and read them as a book, a narrative. And what I realized is there were threads through the letters. Bezos talked about what they did as a company and touted, earnings and growth and those kinds of things.
Right.
But in addition, he talked about how they did it. And that's what I found really unique and intriguing.
So he was kind of an open book, no pun intended,
Yeah.
about his business and how he grew it.
Yeah, and I would say as much as he could be, and more so than most. I don't know. The only person I could compare him to is Warren Buffett. And again, Buffett's been writing letters for, I think 40 years now. Lots of books have been written about his letters. Similar kind of idea. And while Bezos' style is unique, it was that same idea of, okay, here's the progress we've made. Here's the number of customers we have and how much we've grown. But here's why. Here's how. And that's where the principles came out of.
Okay. All right. Got it. So, I think one thing for my audience would be very interesting, because you really are a risk expert is what you are.
Okay.
And it would be fun to examine for a few minutes before we get into the letters. It'd be fun to examine risk. How would you, for someone who, and I think a lot of people out there in the world face risk and they turn around and run away in the other direction, instead of saying, okay, how can I embrace this risk? How can I take this chance? Can you give us some background on just what you know about risk and how it applies to various people?
That's one of the concepts that Bezos talks a lot about, and I call it strategic risk. In fact, in the book, I call Bezos the master of risk because of how he uses risk strategically to grow. And I think that's what certainly is a counterintuitive idea, especially for me coming out of the insurance industry, where literally everything we do is to mitigate risk, reduce risk, transfer risk to an insurance policy. That's what the business is. When I start talking about not taking enough risk, it's counterintuitive at first. So Bezos talks about, and really where this comes from, Bezos talks about experimentation a lot, that Amazon and other businesses need to experiment in order to invent on behalf of the customer. And that invention then allows them to innovate. And so that's a whole other concept that I think the focus in today's world on innovation is, I won't say backwards, but skipping steps. Let's go back to experimentation.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It made me think about Steve Jobs and his experimentation with music, and what came about of it was the iPod, which became
Exactly.
the iPhone, which became everybody's.
Well, and I'm talking to you from Nashville, so, the music industry here really got a wake-up call, and that's kind of, enforces, I think, my idea. The music industry had been doing things the same way for a long time. iPod came along. All of a sudden, you could get a song for 99 cents, not an album for $16 or $18.
Right.
So that completely changed the economics. And another example of not identifying a trend early enough to actually take advantage of it, but being run over by it. So those experiments inherently have failure built into them. Because if you know an experiment's going to work, it's not an experiment. So you have to embrace failure if you're going to experiment with a new product, new platform, new service, new customer interaction, all those things. And they don't always work the first time. And again, lots of examples there of, experimenting over and over and over again to finally get to what the goal is.
Yeah, along the same lines, we just talked about Steve Jobs and the iPod. I'm thinking back at the same time when he was releasing his iPods, Microsoft was chasing him. They had a similar device, but it never went anywhere.
It never went anywhere. That's correct. And let's extend that a little bit. So when the iPhone came out,
yes,
it had the iPod built into it. So they were willing to kill the iPod to put it in the iPhone. And they did that a number of different times. So they weren't holding on to it. It was a step toward where we are today, 6 years later, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah.
I can't remember. 2007, the iPhone was announced. Changed the music industry, changed how we interact with information, but they were willing to cannibalize the iPod to make the iPhone successful.
So that's a good example of risk on risk.
Yeah.
Took a risk with music and then said, I'm gonna combine two devices into one and see what happens.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right. So what would be your advice to someone who is maybe in the early stages of thinking about starting a business, or they've gotten their business to one level and they really want to go to the next level, but they're just not sure what to do?
Well, and I think that's frankly where experimentation comes again back into the conversation. A couple things. One of the things that I discovered in the research I originally did, one of the reasons companies that were once successful and are no longer here is that they relied on their initial success without taking the necessary steps to invent something else. And so, I mean, again, common names: Kodak, BlackBerry, Blockbuster. Again, I'll take Blockbuster. People rented VHS tapes from them, and they had a great business for a long time. They charged late fees. People never liked late fees, but they made millions of dollars on those late fees. But then along comes Netflix, who now is renting DVD movies via mail. And Blockbuster at one point, Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, you should buy us. And they said, why? We don't need you. So that's the mindset that I think traps too many businesses who aren't willing to step out. And I have to say, taking additional risk isn't just willy-nilly, kind of let's throw the spaghetti on the wall and see if it sticks. It's intentional, it's strategic. You do as much as you possibly can do to not fail. And if you do fail, then you go back and find out, okay, what didn't we understand? So that's the strategic part of it. And even a small, I can hear small business owners going, well, I'm not Amazon. I don't have billions of dollars. Neither did Jeff Bezos when he started. He started in a garage on his hands and knees, putting books in packages and driving them to the post office. And he continued to experiment. So you experiment on the scale of where you are and do as much as you possibly can do to prevent a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, I think that brings up something else that I've always found interesting with business is that, the best way to describe it is I'm starting a new business. I've got some capital, so I'm going to go out and buy a new car, which has nothing to do with the business. It has more to do with how I see my lifestyle.
Exactly.
And what I'm hearing from you, and I know that Jeff Bezos drove a Honda Accord for many years.
He did.
What I'm hearing from you is stay focused on your business and where you want to go with it, and then let everything follow after that.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
And I think also, Johnny, the concept of an entrepreneur is a risk taker. And I actually think most entrepreneurs aren't a risk taker. Some are, no question, but too many or a lot are very conservative. And that's where, an unwillingness to try something new because they don't know if it's going to work or not. And I think that's something that needs to be, what's the right word? Need to be thought about and be more intentional about.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how Bezos engages risk. Is he unique about this, or he just is following a familiar pattern that's successful?
I think both. I think he's unique in how he applies it across the business and has applied it as they've grown. And Bezos, Amazon, has very few and very small research and development labs or projects.
Really?
Every employee is tasked with trying to improve whatever process they're responsible for. So you get a lot of really small experiments going on or testing or ideas, and then they're tested brought into a larger group. And then if they work, they're moved out across the company. That's also how Amazon identifies leaders. So if you come up with a great idea and you can show how it might work, you often are tasked with leading that initiative within the company or the division or the part that you're responsible for. So they also, I think this is really important, they have developed over time tools to help them in this risk process. Tool, and really counterintuitive, is originally called a 6-page memo. Today, it's more likely to be called a working backward document. Now, what that is, 2004, Jeff Bezos sent an email around to a senior leadership team and said, PowerPoint-oriented presentations, so PowerPoint, keynote, whatever, slide-oriented presentations will no longer be allowed in our meetings. Well, yeah, exactly. What? He said, in its place, you, being the person who is bringing the idea, who needs a decision to move forward or not, will be required to write what became a maximum of 6 pages memo. Physical written out memo, starting with what's called a future press release. So you are writing the press release for the day this new whatever product, platform, service is announced to the public. What's the benefit to the consumer? Why is this a great new thing? You think that through in the very beginning. And then you create what's called a FAQ, right? What are all the questions the people in the meeting are going to ask? And then you write out your answers.
That's fascinating. That is taking it in reverse.
Yes. Now, here's what's even, to me at least, more fascinating. That memo is not sent out prior to the meeting. It is physically printed out and handed out at the beginning of the meeting to each of the participants. And the first 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how big the decision is, are spent everybody reading the memo, making notes in the margins, questions they may have, something they disagree with, whatever. But what happens is, and here's what Bezos said, executives are busy. They say they'll read the memo. They won't. And so we're going to carve out homeroom time at the beginning of the meeting. So literally everybody's on the same page. They read through it, however long it takes, and then they open the discussion for, again, questions, comments. What about this data? Here's something you may have missed. And they have a much richer discussion. It really is the concept of slowing down to speed up. Because what happens too often, he says, is that people hide behind bullet points. They haven't thought deeply enough about whatever it is, the point they're making, and writing it out clarifies thinking. And I think that's one thing that really distinguishes Bezos is his ability to write and his emphasis on writing for honing your thoughts down into kind of the core. And so that's a process that still goes on today at Amazon.
I'm thinking about some of the things that Amazon has started. I think the biggest one is their whole networking service. Is it AWS?
Yeah, AWS.
I mean, you think of the size and capacity of that part of their business, and you just described on how it started.
Yes.
Somebody started with a press release about AWS and then wrote about, had to answer all the questions about it, and then brought in the team, and they all had to read about it. And then they make a decision on, geez, should we even move forward or not?
Right.
But that's
and the core of AWS actually was to solve a problem at Amazon, which was all these different departments were all coding and programming, creating databases, but there was no cohesiveness across the organization. So AWS started as an internal process, and then somebody said, and you're right, somebody said, hey, if this is good for us, there may be other developers who would want this.
Yeah.
And that then when, okay, if we're going to externalize this and allow others in, what does that look like?
Right. And that is so counterintuitive if you think about it.
Yes.
Okay. What a lesson. What a fantastic lesson. I hope some listeners really play that again, because starting with, remember Steve Covey used to say, start with the end in mind.
End in mind, yeah. Stephen Covey, yep.
Stephen Covey, it's the same thing. Start with the end in mind.
Exactly.
Give me the press release on how we're going to release this, and we'll work backwards from there.
And we'll work backwards from there. And again, that's where the working backwards name came from is, and again, as Bezos says, we work backwards from the customer to create our products. And that's a really key concept and principle at Amazon.
Yeah. Wow. I so appreciate your comments. So, let's talk about the concept of customer obsessed versus customer focused.
Okay.
Because I know you cover that in your book.
I do. And it's a principle, and the principle is obsess over customers. And Bezos' original 1997 letter had several different sections in it, kind of really setting the groundwork for Amazon literally for the next 30 plus years. One of those sections was the focus on customers. And what he said is we will have an obsessive focus on customers. And that really caught my attention because every business knows they need to take care of customers, right? If you don't take care of customers, you don't have a business. And so businesses talk about customer service, customer connection, customer journey, right? All those kind of words. But when Bezos said we will obsess over customers, to me, that's a different level, a different mindset, because the word obsession has both positive and negative connotations, right? We talk about somebody who's obsessed with, which is talking about how over the top they are. Well, when you're talking about customers, can you be too over the top? And what happens when you are that focused on the customer, and what happens, and Bezos describes it as inventing on behalf of the customer. So they know their customers' wants, needs, and desires so deeply that they're able to look at their customers and imagine how they could create, again, products, platform, services that remove friction, remove frustration, and benefit the customer. So that's customer obsession. And again, it's a core tenet at Amazon.
Yeah, in my experience with Amazon, and I have to admit, I'm an Amazon user. The one feature I like the most is there's certain things that I reorder on a periodic basis, and they're always there. I know right where to go. I don't have to look them up. I know right where to go, press a button, and they're on their way.
In an hour, a day, 2 days, I mean, depending on where you're located, right?
Right. And I'm semi-rural. It usually takes at least a day.
Okay.
I'm not in a big city where I can get it in 3 hours, like some
Not yet,
places.
or they
Not yet.
continue to build out their drone program, so we got.
Wow. So let's just, can we talk about successful failure for a minute?
We can.
When you describe the term successful failure, what are you, those two words kind of compete with each other.
You don't see them together very often. I totally agree. And really the idea there, again, if you're going to experiment, you're going to fail. So what's the culture that you're building at your company around allowing employees to fail? And I'm convinced that employees aren't afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure, depending on the culture. So how can there be a successful failure? Well, an experiment can be a failure, but be a success because of what you learned. And let me give you a quick example from Amazon. In 2014, Amazon released a phone. Most people don't remember it. It's called the Fire Phone. And Bezos' pet project. He thought Amazon needed a phone. Well, why? I don't know. iPhone was out, Android was out, people had chosen their platforms. Why Amazon needed a phone is still a mystery. But they launched the phone, and in 2014, big splash, and literally they had to reduce the price to a penny to get anybody to buy one. And they didn't buy it because, again, why do I need a phone from Amazon to help me shop easier? And so at the end of 2014, Amazon wrote off $180 million in inventory and development costs. Maybe one of their biggest, could be. However, here's where the success comes from. So to create the phone, they had to create a whole lot of new skills around voice processing, around how phone works, around radio, right, all those kinds of things. So it's got a demonstration in late 2014 of a new device the team was working on that was a cylinder that sat on a table that you could talk to. What we now know as Alexa, the software that powers it, and the Echo, the device that listens for that audio trigger and then processes that audio and responds back in audio. Well, the Echo and Alexa, that ecosystem has become quite a success. And so that's an example of, we learned all this stuff doing the phone, didn't work on the phone well, but boy, we were able to take all that we learned and put it into this other device that actually continues to work well.
Steve, what comes to mind, and that's a great example, isn't it? How one thing led to another. I'm sitting here, who I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about McDonald's, of all companies. But years ago, there was a book called Behind the Golden Arches that really described the McDonald's process. And what I found interesting, and this is a similarity, Ray Kroc had a whole list of menu items that he planned to add to McDonald's. And every one of them was a failure. And he had one of his franchisees come to him and say, I want to do this. I think it was the breakfast sandwich or something. Okay. And he said, well, I don't think it'll work, but if you want to try it in your store under these conditions and let me know how it works out. And it was a franchisee in good standing. And so he tried it. And what was so interesting was it was a success. And then once Kroc realized it was a success in one store, they rolled it into a test, and then they finally rolled it out to their whole system. And what I've learned about McDonald's is almost all the innovation has come from, not from within the company, but from outside the company with their franchisees. And McDonald's has learned how to incorporate that together. I'm hearing the same thing with you and Bezos and his employees and his staff in working together to kind of have that relationship that says, If you're a bright employee, let's explore your idea.
Right. Yep.
It's that same
Exactly.
concept.
Yep, it is.
Interesting. So if you fail, what I'm hearing you say is if you fail with one thing, it may create an opportunity for another thing.
And let me also say, Johnny, that kind of in this conversation around failure, Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So we're not talking about continued failure. I mean, they expect performance.
Right.
And they know failure is going to be part of that. So that's that interesting kind of balance between kind of who cares, I'll just try it and see, versus attentional strategic, let's think through all the things that we need and how to make sure we succeed as much as we can.
Yeah, there's a discipline that working from the, how do we say that, from the beginning back to from the end back to the beginning is the discipline that's required. So if you just have somebody who's out in the back smoking weed and then comes in with this fantastic idea, but it goes nowhere because they didn't really give it any thought, is not going to work in a Bezos operation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and that's just the interesting culture part, of a business is, okay, how do we encourage people to experiment and help them understand that it's intentional, strategic. It's not being incompetent, that we don't tolerate incompetence.
Right. Very interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. And the name of your book is, why don't you say it? Because you can say it better than me.
I'd be happy to. It's The Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon.
Right. And how does one find you, Steve? If I'm sure your book's on Amazon, but maybe
it is on Amazon, so you certainly can find it there. And the book website is thebezosletters.com, and there's some additional information there that might help you as you're reading through the book and applying that concepts and principles to your own business. And then my primary social platform is LinkedIn, and so I'm a top voice there. So if you're listening and want to connect with me there, frankly, the best way is to let me know that you listen to this, and I'll be happy to connect.
Okay, very good. And do you do any consulting?
I do. I do really a couple things around the book. One, I do speaking, so keynotes and things like that.
Right.
And then, consulting work with businesses, helping them leverage these concepts and implement them within their own organizations.
Right. Okay. One more thing. It just kind of popped into my head regarding the insurance industry and risk. This is totally unrelated to what we've been talking about, but I want to fit it in there. So many people, I think, don't understand when their insurance rates go up, why they go up. And I'm assuming it's all based on actuarial tables of risk.
Yes. Yes.
It's all about risk, right?
It is. And here's a couple thoughts around that. And certainly we're seeing a lot of this now, right, with some of the natural catastrophes, some of the man-made catastrophes, that are happening. So insurance is based on the law of large numbers, which means the larger numbers of people you insure, the more likely you are able to predict what your losses will be. And that gives the insurance company the information they need on how much premium they need to cover expected losses. I think one of the fallacies, and I hear this a lot, is, well, I paid premiums into the company for 20 years and now they're canceling me. And I think the faulty thinking there is the insurance company doesn't have an account for you. It has an account for millions.
Right.
And that your premium is paid into that. So if their losses are higher than expected, then everybody's rates goes up, not just yours, but everybody in the class. And as you've seen, certainly in California and a few other states where, insurance companies are pulling out because their losses far exceed their premium income, and that's not sustainable long-term either, right? So it's really complicated, but the idea that the insurance company has an account for you that they pay your claims out of is not accurate. And I think, it's you, your neighbors, everybody on your street, everybody in your all of that is aggregated together.
Right. Well, Steve, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to say that. We're winding it up, but I wanted to slide that in there, and I'm going to fit that into our conversation somewhere.
Right.
Not sure, but I think it's important for people to know that because they just don't get it when it comes to insurance.
No, they don't. They think the insurance, and there are bad players everywhere.
Sure.
But in general, people could not live without insurance.
Right.
In today's modern world.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree.
It's a vital tool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm prejudiced. I mean, let's be honest, but I've been around this industry a long time.
Steve, I certainly appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. Subscribe to hear a new and unique guest each week as they comment on their life's journey and share experiences with lifestyle, culture, and career. You can always find us at minuteswithmango.com.